So today, as Siobhan indicated, I'm going to talk a bit about the research that has been going on in relation to hedgerows. So of course, we're all aware we have some serious targets that need to be met, including those outlined in the Climate Action Plan 2021. And in that, we can see some specific references made in relation to hedgerows and actions pertaining to agriculture, but also the land use change and forestry sector, so the LULUCF sector. Okay, so carbon sequestration, of course, that's the process of taking atmospheric carbon dioxide and utilizing it to grow plant biomass, crops, and to be stored in biomass and also into the soil. And of course, hedges store carbon in the woody biomass and in the leaves, but also in the roots and in the soil underneath that hedgerows. So of course, ecosystems that sequester more carbon dioxide than they emit are sinks, but conversely, those that emit more than they sequester are carbon sources. And I think it's important to point out that here in Ireland, year on year, our LULUCF sector has been a source of emissions, which is quite different to most other EU states. But I suppose the positive out of that is that, of course, carbon sequestration can be harnessed and can help to balance our greenhouse gas emissions. And already in Ireland, we do have the marginal abatement cost curve for land use measures that can help indicate or identify ways by which we can use that land base to harness carbon sequestration and try and reverse these emissions and increase that sink potential. But yeah, as Siobhan says, hedgerow research is not new, certainly in Teagasc. I must point out, of course, that most of the research to date, a lot of that has been done by our colleagues actually in Ashtown in terms of the work that's been done in relation to the land use budgets. Of course, there's a lot of work in biodiversity in other areas, but primarily the work in relation to carbon has been done by our colleagues in Ashtown. And to be able to include hedgerows in our budgets, we need to know the amount of carbon stored in hedgerows nationally, and also to be able to provide an annual sequestration figure. So to answer these questions, we need to know the extent, the size. So again, what are the biophysical makeup of our hedgerows, their width, their height, the type, are they very managed, cut right back, or are they allowed to accumulate more biomass? Are there trees, are they new, old? And of course, what is the typical amount of carbon stored in a hedgerow? So in relation to extent, we have the first early work in that space. We had the first map in 2011, the Teagasc hedgerow map. But of course, we know there's been a lot of technological progress in terms of being able to calculate remotely the biomass in our hedgerows. And in 2012, LiDAR scanning, a project based on LiDAR scanning, showed that this was a really excellent technique to successfully estimate the biomass that we have in our hedgerows. And so utilizing the outcomes from that work and using previously published models, we have the standard estimates that we utilize at the moment in relation to hedgerow sequestration. So currently it's a wide range between 0.66 and 3.3 tons of CO2 per hectare per annum. And if we scale that up to the national aggregate scale, we're talking about up to 1.1 megatons of CO2 per year. Of course, LiDAR is expensive, so we wanted to see then were there other alternatives, and what we found, or our colleagues in the FIRS and our colleagues in Ashtown found, is that actually radar wasn't a sufficiently suitable technique for accurately measuring biomass. So either drone required or other unmanned air vehicle or LiDAR, but it could detect hedgerow removals. And while we do have a lot of hedgerows in Ireland, we have about 680,000 kilometres, some net removals were detected based on analysis of aerial photographic records. But I suppose one of the more positive things with that is that the research indicates that the rate of decline slowed down very much in the latter half of that period. But of course, again, it called again that research for some direct measurements of hedgerow biomass. And this is, of course, where the work that we are currently doing within the Farm Carbon project comes in. So what we're doing in this research is we are calculating the carbon stock of measured biomass from selected hedgerows. So really trying to capture the range with respect to management intensity. So very, very managed to much lesser management, if you like. And then relate the volume measurements captured using remote technology to a carbon stock. So this has not been done here before, but ultimately what we would like to be able to do then is say that, okay, well, a change in a biomass volume indicates a change in carbon stock. And also we are developing an integrated scorecard for best management practices and other ecosystem services. So just briefly, I won't go into the graph, but of course, as mentioned by the first speaker, we need to know the carbon pools for the different pools as specified under the IPCC. So of course, there's quite a lot of separation of hedgerow to be able to do that. So of course, of interest to you at home maybe is, how can I increase carbon sequestration? So ultimately, it boils down really to this whole idea of being able to increase your biomass. So allowing accumulation of that, because of course your management regime is going to impact that. Density, so if you over trim, it's going to limit your accumulation, but also it induces gappiness. Width is shown to be a key factor in increasing the capacity to sequester carbon. And of course, if you have trees in the boundary, then that's going to be a greater carbon store in your above ground. Finally, in terms of soils under hedgerow, on croplands, this was shown to have an increase relative to that land use. But it will be interesting to see what we find in terms of the soils relative to the grasslands that we've also looked at in the current project. So just to summarize, the land sector, it's currently an emission source, but of course there are ways and means and managements that can enhance the sink potential in terms of our soil and our biomass management. Estimates or means to quantify the extent of hedgerows have been trialed. We know how best to do that, but now we're working to refine our models for hedgerow. Options to enhance sequestration exist, and just to leave you with the fact that, of course, hedgerows, they're not only important from a carbon regulation perspective, but also they have many, many other important ecosystem service benefits at a farm level. Thank you very much.